What's really going on then with these charges, the 11 charges against Officer Rolfe? Why is this happening? It seems like it's so clear that this is an overcharge at a minimum. I would argue that any decent defense attorney would be able to make an incredibly strong case against these charges, and there's a clear animus from the DA against this officer to just give him the count of countless counts, as we say, right? Just throw everything you can. Find, he also, he used a swear word, and that's a violation of the regulations on the job. Let's throw that in there, too. I mean, whatever it is. But there was a very important moment in the DA's press conference where he said that after Officer Rolfe had shot his weapon and hit Rayshard Brooks, he did not seem to have any good feelings toward him. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was, there seemed to be other feelings. Not subtle at all. I mean, not so. Oh, okay. So the two white officers who were entirely respectful and professional for 40 minutes, who then all of a sudden had to wrestle this guy because he was resisting arrest and attacking them. Resisting arrest is one thing. Going for a cop's gun or going for a cop's taser is another. That's an elevation. And that's not, I'm trying to get away alone. That's, I'm going to get away. And if I have to hurt you, if I have to kill you to get away, I'm going to do it. Rayshard Brooks was out on parole. This would have been a DUI, which he was clearly guilty of. They gave him a breathalyzer. The guy was driving drunk. I thought that was a crime, by the way. Is that still a crime? Or does that fall under the all lives matter idea that we just want to stop people from driving their car into another car and killing an innocent human being or into another person on the street? Is that not DUI right now? Not really something we're going to enforce? I just want to know. Because I thought it was a reckless thing, and we all could agree that with the thousands and thousands of people killed by drunk drivers every year, that we all want that law to be enforced. Are we not sure about that right now? Oh, no, because all laws are up in question. Any law that the left doesn't find politically useful in the moment can be dispensed with at a moment's notice. So the district attorney takes the position in all of this that there was a racial animus. I mean, he didn't say that, but that seems to be the implication. I mean, it wasn't subtle. There were other thoughts going on here. You know what the district attorney did not, what Paul Howard did not add into his presentation, where he was making the justification and with slides and everything for why he thinks that this officer should face possibly being murdered by the state. And this would be murder by the state because there is no way that this was just. I mean, in a normal universe, maybe you'd be able to make a charge of excessive force and involuntary manslaughter. I mean, that, and I think that would be overcharged. I think that's wrong. I think that they used force based upon a perceived and real threat to their safety and their law enforcement officers, and I stand behind every single word of that. Nothing has changed. But I'll tell you this, a very important part of the district attorney's presentation that somehow got, or rather, a very important part of the events that was left out of the DA's presentation here was that Officer Rolfe, after discharging his weapon and after standing on him and kicking him, and we're told that was brought into the press conference, which was really a Paul Howard reelection campaign ad. Let's understand that too, for this DA who was elected by popular vote. He left out that Rolfe performed emergency CPR and was holding the suspect, because he was a suspect, and saying, "Stay with me, Mr. Brooks. Stay with me. Stay with me, Mr. Brooks." And they call the rescue ambulance. Now, for 2 minutes, they say they did not give him life-saving. They did not give him enough, life-saving attention. After you've discharged your weapon and your adrenaline is flowing like that, some of you have probably seen the movie Sully. And you remember how they were gonna, for political reasons, very different kind of case, wasn't a racial issue, but for very different reasons, they were gonna, Captain Sullenberger, remember, they were gonna, the Miracle on the Hudson, but they wanted to get him, right? Why'd you do that? Why'd you land the plane in the water that way? You could have taken it back to the airport, right? This is the story that's told in the movie. I'm sure there's some dramatic license to it, but that was what was at issue. And he said, okay, fine, you can run a simulation, but that's a simulation by a robot. When a human being finds out that they've had 2 goose strikes or whatever, 2 geese have hit the engines, and now they have effectively no power, no thrust whatsoever on the plane, any human being is going to have about 30 or 40 seconds, as you remember from the movie, where they're just, their adrenaline is flowing, they're going to pause, you're not a machine. This is not expected, you're not ready for this. You know, was 2 minutes a little long? I'm not in those cops' shoes, but is a minute long? No. 45, you just fired your gun. For 45 seconds, you're going to assess the situation. Is he still a threat? Oh my gosh, how badly hit is he? What do I do? What just happened? There's going to be a lot of things happening in your head. There's a reason why after police use their weapon, they have to see a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. They have to have their procedures in place to deal with the trauma of using your weapon in a situation like this. It is a traumatic experience. I don't know, people on the left would probably ridicule this, but they're cowards who don't understand what the real world is actually like. Why weren't we told that Officer Rolfe, who it was implied was a racist or had some racial animus? Wasn't said, but it was implied by the DA. DA is African American. He was surrounded by numerous other African American employees of the state of Georgia. The optics for his career getting reelected seem quite clear as it pertains to why he would bring the harshest charges imaginable against this white officer, right? I mean, this was a destroy the cop press conference. That's what this was. Just annihilate this guy. I haven't even had a trial yet, but annihilate this guy. Because otherwise you can't explain to me why it would be left off that this officer, who we're being told was a racist, was performing CPR and pleading with Brooks to keep breathing and stay alive. Does anybody think, if we're really going to take the left and the BLM movement and the cowards in the lib media and all the people who are so terrified of this all the time, of actually looking at what's going on here and what's happening to our country, which right now is being pulled apart on purpose by reckless vandals. And I don't just mean the ones that are destroying stores and looting. I mean those who are kicking at the load-bearing walls of this country, who are swinging sledgehammers at the pillars of our society and laughing and claiming self-righteousness while they do it. What's really going on here? We are to believe that these 2 officers who were called to a legitimate circumstance for police involvement, who were completely respectful and calm and measured in every single step of a 40-minute long conversation, but then when they were presented with resistance and a threat, it was a threat. To say otherwise is preposterous. From this man, it was racial animus that caused them to act as they did. All of a sudden, they became racist, or all of a sudden, their racism was activated here. Instead of this individual, Rayshard Brooks, attacked 2 cops and then was shot in the ensuing fight that happened. That is if you just want to just break this thing whole down to its essence, to its foundation, we are being told that this was another instance of systematic white racism in the police force against a black American. That is what is behind all of this. That's why this is happening. That's why he's facing a felony murder charge that could give him the death penalty. Murder one? I mean, are you kidding me? Death penalty? It's also why law enforcement recognizes that they're going to have to get into the fight over this too. This isn't just an Atlanta thing. This is across the whole country, because these officers were not racists. These officers are not murderers. They're not KKK members. They're not all these awful things that are going to be said. And I know the one officer has turned state's evidence because he's trying to save his life. But Officer Rolfe was doing the best that he could under difficult circumstances, and it is not his fault that this situation escalated. The level of force that was used here was in response to escalations made by somebody who was a drunk, convicted felon out on parole who did not want to get arrested again. That's where this is. And it's a tragedy, and the guy shouldn't have died. No one wanted him to die. It's a bad thing that we're all sad about. I mean, I do not want anyone being shot on the streets by cops. I mean, but if you're going to be a threat to police, they are allowed to defend themselves. But instead, what we're told is that this is proving the point of BLM once again, and there will probably be more riots. There'll probably be more rage in the streets based in what I think is the dishonest version of what happened here. That's not what happened. This was not racist, systematic racist murdering cop situation. And law enforcement in Atlanta, they're at least last night, I was seeing all these reports. They were walking off the job. Atlanta cops calling in sick, saying sorry, deciding that they're not going to do it. They're protesting the charges against him. Atlanta Police Department morale is down tenfold. That's the headline on CBS News. We're hearing a lot about this. Atlanta police call out sick after murder charge. Look, how am I supposed to tell our brothers and sisters in law enforcement? Remember, the law enforcement community in Atlanta, it's over 50% black officers on the Atlanta PD, in the Atlanta Police Department. So when they're trashing law enforcement officers, I mean, a lot of the officers are black. And I'm sitting here trying to defend all the officers, the black officers, the white officers, all of them, for doing a very important job and doing it well and being part of that front line against viciousness and anarchy and destruction that comes from the criminal element. But they're calling in sick. I think you're going to see more of this. People are going to say they've had enough. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has said they had enough officers last night because they could cover this. And the Atlanta Police Department saying that the suggestions that multiple officers from each zone had walked off the job were inaccurate. The department is experiencing a higher than usual number of call-outs with the incoming shift. Yeah, Atlanta PD, what do you think that is? You think that's a coincidence? Preposterous. You're also seeing that there are other state agencies, law enforcement agencies, that are claiming that unless there's an officer in distress call, they're not going to be helping. This is the society, this is the country that the left is trying to make right now, as we're in an election year, and there will be control of the federal government, at least, at stake this fall. This is what they want. This is the country they're trying to create, one in which cops cannot do their jobs, do not want to show up for work anymore, and know that the politics have been weaponized against them, all in the mad, grasping power interests of the left. That's what this is about. It was disgusting. It was honestly upsetting yesterday to watch it. I'm going to keep following this story, and I hope that we have some justice to speak of coming forward. But what happened at that press conference was a travesty, an absolute travesty.
The United States didn't inherit slavery from anybody. We created it. It got created by the Virginia General Assembly and the legislatures of other states. It got created by the court systems in colonial America and since that enforced fugitive slave laws. We created it, and we created it and maintained it over centuries. And in my lifetime, we have finally stopped some of those practices, but we've never gone back to undo it. Stopping racist practices at year 350 of 400 years, but then taking no effort to dismantle them is not the same as truly combating racism.
This is the kind of either historical inaccuracy or really perhaps you could just say historically misleading stuff that so very clearly describes so much of the left's view of these things now. To say that we did not inherit slavery, it seems to suggest, and to say that we created slavery in America is historical ignorance, the likes of which it's stunning that Tim Kaine could utter on the floor of Congress and not think that he's a total moron. Slavery, as anybody who has ever read the Bible knows, has existed for really as long as human history has existed. Slavery is something that existed in many European countries well up into the early 19th century. If you want to read of the most horrific exploitation of slaves and slavery, perhaps of the entire colonial period, it would be a case that you could make, certainly in the European context, that it was the Belgians and the Belgian Congo. I mean, there's the depravity and the horrific, and who would, the Belgians don't all walk around all the time apologizing for their legacy or their history of slavery. But what they did in the Belgian Congo is horrific beyond words, and it really was a genocide. And yet there's no historical context given for statements like this that Tim Kaine makes, that we created slavery. Almost like Americans are uniquely guilty, historically speaking, right? Slavery's been gone for 150 years now. But historically speaking, we are uniquely guilty of that institution, and that's just not true. It's just not true. There has been slavery practiced in societies all over the world. In fact, there was a very interesting fact check done of the kente cloth shawl, scarf, whatever you want to call it, that Pelosi and all the different members of Congress have been wearing in a show of just absurd pandering, of course. But like Nancy Pelosi feels a real kinship to this kingdom in Ghana, historical kingdom in Ghana. But it turns out that the dynasty most associated with kente cloth was involved in the African slave trade by enslaving Africans and selling them to Europeans. Time magazine did this fact check. I'm just telling you. I think it was Time magazine, but this fact check is out there. So, there was slavery practice in Africa at the same time that the European slave trade was exploiting the existence of a slave trade in Africa, where some kingdoms and some tribes were enslaving others. I've told you extensively on this show about the Muslim African slave trade of white Christians that went into the millions. Again, in the 1600s, into the 1700s, stretching back even into the 1500s. This has been around, and now this is not, it's horrible. It's like saying, genocide is bad. It's like saying, racism is bad. I mean, these are universal truths. Slavery is bad. Of course, it is evil. Slavery is bad and evil. Genocide is bad and evil. Abortion is bad and evil. But our society will come to terms with that one another day. But can we at least have some historical context for statements like this by Tim Kaine? No, of course not. Better to seem woke for the senator. All right, back by popular demand. The one and only Dinesh D'Souza is with us. He has a new documentary coming out, The Trump Card, and he also has a new book out that you should be buying, you should be reading, The United States of Socialism. Mr. Dinesh D'Souza, great to have you.
Hey, it's always terrific. Glad to be on the show.
So let's start with the documentary, and then I want to drill into some of what's going on in the country right now. What are we going to see in the Trump Card doc that you've got coming out?
Well, I think it's going to be my best film yet. This is number 5, my 5th documentary. It's couldn't be more timely, and it embraces all the craziness that's going on here, but it also lays out what's at stake. It's a deeper dive than you normally get in the media about what does socialism mean? Where is it coming from? What's driving it? Not just in politics, but also the larger cultural forces. Remember, we're dealing with people who sometimes care more about abortion than the minimum wage, more about the transgender bathroom than they care about universal basic income. So there's a cultural Marxism element here. And then there's Trump, this very kind of unusual figure who is de facto the leader, the political leader of the fight against socialism. So the movie kind of dives into all that. It's going to leave you knowing a lot more, but also fired up and with a kind of concrete battle plan for taking on these guys who are certainly out of control.
Dinesh, we use the term cultural Marxism. I've said it before on this show, but you have written about this for many years, been studying this for decades. Just for everyone out there, I think we all, this is one of those concepts, we all have a sense of it, but what is your definition? How should we be thinking of cultural Marxism? Because, often leftists will say, well, Marxism is about the controlling the means of production, the distribution. What's cultural Marxism, right? And they try to get into the semantics of this. What should people be thinking of as cultural Marxism and how it's affecting us today?
In the 1920s, the Italian communist Gramsci made a very interesting observation. He said, look, we Marxists are never going to win as long as we are just trying to convert the working class. He goes, why is this? Because he said the working class, even though they may be oppressed under capitalism, they are part of a larger bourgeois culture. This is a culture that is nourished by Judaism and Christianity. This is a culture that has imbued with them a story of history, a sense of values. And so you cannot look at them as economic animals alone. These working class people have also assimilated bourgeois culture. And as long as that's the case, they will never have a revolution. So according to Gramsci, we have to take over the universities, we meaning the left. Or we have to take over the organs and institutions of culture. We need, you may say, counter-indoctrination. And so the left has taken up this project with a vengeance, starting in the 1960s, but continuing to now. And they have, in fact, I think, successfully seized most of academia, most of the mainstream media, virtually all of Hollywood, seemingly now digital media. And so they're conducting, you may almost call it, cultural military operations against us. You should understand a lot of this mayhem in the streets, the pulling down of monuments, by the way, not just Confederate monuments, but Lincoln's monument. This is part of their cultural assault on what they called bourgeois or Judeo-Christian values. Cultural Marxism is the non-economic component of the left's culture war.
We're speaking to Dinesh D'Souza, author of many books, including his latest that is just out now, United States of Socialism, and he's got a documentary coming up as well, The Trump Card. Dinesh, I've got to say, I'm not, and I don't mean this personally, I mean the conservative movement, not feeling tired of winning these days. With these Supreme Court decisions that have come down, it feels like the conservative legal project is really in question. It feels like with the assault on the statues and on our cities and the looting and the rioting, there has not been the counterpunch, the counter narrative that we would want to see. What do you see going on? And I know you've got this in the Trump card. How do we turn this around? Because I feel like, and I've said this publicly for a couple of weeks now, it feels like right now the Trump movement is losing, or at least losing ground.
Well, the left is very good at seizing its opportunities, and interesting to see how they have used the George Floyd killing. Every conservative that I know was publicly outraged immediately upon seeing the video. So there was an opportunity for racial healing, for racial unity. We all agree on this, that there should not be bad cops and there should only be good cops. But the left realized that they don't want that. They need division because that is part of their strategy. The whole notion of identity socialism, as I call it, is to set rich against poor, black against white, male against female, straight against gay, legal against illegal, and then try to create a majority coalition of oppressed victim groups. And so the left said, look, let's take this George Floyd killing and stick on top of it a larger narrative, a very controversial narrative. The problem, as they see it, is not just bad cops, it's all cops. Cops are racist. The country is racist. Capitalism is imbued with white supremacy. It's been that way since at least 1776, if not before. And the left said, let's force feed people this narrative. And if they dispute the narrative, let's accuse them of being bigots because they don't care about George Floyd. Now, I would say that our side is always caught with sort of deer-like surprise when this happens. I mean, they do it all the time, but we never seem to know how to respond. And we respond to their narrative with what can be called data. Like, wait a minute, it is factually true that more whites, but the problem is, a narrative isn't data. A narrative is a storyline, an interpretation of a wide set of facts, and it can only be overthrown with a counter narrative that is also a story of American history and the place of racism in it. We don't generate that narrative. Trump doesn't do it. Republicans don't do it. Conservative intellectual magazines don't do it. And it desperately needs to be done.
What would that narrative, Dinesh, sound like at this point in time? I mean, how can we address these issues? I mean, they're not just, as you know, attacking statues of Confederate generals. They're beheading Christopher Columbus statues. There was a shooting at a statue where there was an Antifa group there and a militia group over Juan de Oñate, which I think is that's a figure that less than 1% of Americans without resorting to Google would even know who this guy is. And they're going after all kinds of statues, Churchill statues defaced in London, in the UK. So what does the narrative that addresses this, what feels like mass psychosis, and that's one way that I've described it on the left, it feels like a mass delusion. How do we start to, other than just calling them all crazy, which I think is an important maybe first step, what do we say next?
Let's focus on the Lincoln statue, because I think that is, in a way, the most revealing of all. Every time I talk about Lincoln, the left, there are always some leftist historians who tell me Lincoln was really a progressive, if he lived today, he would have been a Democrat and so on. But they don't really believe this. This is just sort of their public stance. In private, they hate him. They hate Lincoln. Now, why is that? It may seem strange. They hate the man who freed the slaves. By the way, Lincoln's rival, Stephen Douglas, there is a huge monument to Stephen Douglas in Chicago standing right now. It has no guards because it doesn't need any guards. Why? Because no one is going after it. Stephen Douglas was a champion of slavery. Mm-hmm. He made slavery the centerpiece of the Democratic Party platform. So we have a mystery here. The left hates Lincoln, who freed the slaves, more than they hate Douglas, who protected slavery. Now, why is that? The reason is really simple. Lincoln defined slavery as you work and I eat. So for him, slavery was a form of economic confiscation, a form of theft. But Lincoln said, this isn't just slavery. This is the motto and operating principle of the Democratic Party. This is who they are. They're thieves. And fast forward 150 years, and even though people produce a lot of nonsense about the party swapping sides, let me ask you this. Isn't it true now that the central principle of the Democratic Party is economic confiscation? You work, I eat. One guy produces the labor, another guy gets free college or free health care out of it. So the Democratic Party is exactly the same in its core principle as it was in Lincoln's day. And they know that. The left realizes it. So Lincoln is their real enemy. They don't have any objection in principle to enslavement. They don't have any objection in principle to lynching. Look at what they're doing in Atlanta right now. They're conducting basically, I would say, a legal lynching. It's conducted with all the trappings of, he's being indicted and we'll have a jury of his peers. But in the meantime, they work to inflame the jury, just like a lynch mob. So the same party of lynching has now got new targets and a little bit of new strategies, but they're still the same party of lynching, and they're doing it right now.
Speaking to Dinesh D'Souza, you guys have got to see the Trump Card documentary that is going to be released soon, and also pick up The United States of Socialism, his book. I've read many Dinesh books over the years. I recommend this one highly to you. Dinesh, how are we looking for the fall right now? I know a million things can change and all the provisos apply, but I feel like we can't right the ship right now unless we're at least willing to say this is where it's heading. A lot of things, a lot of course corrections can be made. Trump's about to have his first major rally, and I think that I think that Trump has really missed that. I think that he feeds off that energy and that his message feeds off the crowds that come out to hear him. How are we doing now, though, and how do we get this thing moving?
The reason that we made the movie, is because I think it's important for us to make our case. Now, Trump operates a little bit, I would say, like the Bible. And here's what I mean. The Bible doesn't try to prove things. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. It is stated categorically. Jesus is the Son of God. It's not argued for. No evidence is supplied. It's declared. And Trump declares things. America will never be a socialist country. But unlike Reagan, when Reagan gave his Evil Empire speech a generation ago, if you listen to it carefully, you would learn a lot about communism, about the Soviet Union. He would quote Soviet dissidents. In other words, Reagan would produce a narrative. Trump has great strengths, but this is something he does not do. So this is something I want to do to make ultimately a narrative that I think will be very powerful in helping people not only understand what's going on, but know what to do about it. And as I say, what needs to be done about it, certainly long term, there are transformations of culture that we need to be producing and working on right now. Building our own institutions, our own media, our own entertainment, even our own educational systems. I really don't see an alternative to this. There's no way to take back 400 universities. There's no way to take back Hollywood. We've got to ultimately create our own Hollywood.
Dinesh D'Souza, everybody. United States of Socialism is the book. Trump Card is the documentary. Dinesh, I don't know if social distancing will allow it in New York City, but if you guys have a premiere, let me know. I'll come check it out. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Great to be on the show.
How much power does the cancel left, particularly at this very sensitive moment in America, how much power do they really have? Do they have the power to just get you fired for anything and nothing? Well, there are news stories that indicate the answer to that question is yes. And this hat tip to Matt Walsh for raising this one to my attention over at the Daily Wire. NBC San Diego, and this was under the headline, the news headline San Diego gave us, Black Lives Matter. So this is under the vertical of Black Lives Matter. Here's the story. And this was just published a couple of days ago. I just saw it now. There's a local news story. An SDG&E worker, this guy's a truck driver, who was fired. He's a San Diego Gas and Electric employee, pardon me. But he was in a truck, driving a truck, company truck, and he had a stranger follow him, took a picture of him, and then the picture was shared on Twitter. This man, and his name is Cafferty, Emmanuel Cafferty, who is half Mexican, I would point out, as it says in the story. He is half Mexican, so he is somebody who would be able to consider himself a minority, as we know. He was followed by this person who took a photo of him, and I see the photo, and his arm is just hanging outside of his truck at a red light. His hand is outside of the truck, and, I mean, if you stare at it, his thumb is touching his middle finger. He doesn't know that anyone's watching him. He's not taking a photo of himself. He is literally letting his arm rest outside of his truck in San Diego. And he was followed by this person who took this photo because the individual said about him that he was making a white power hand gesture. Now think about the idiocy of this. He's by himself in a truck at a red light looking forward, doesn't know anything about anything going on around him, and is dangling his hand outside of a truck, doesn't even know anyone's looking at him, and he is making a white power hand signal, which we also know is the same as the OK and the circle game hand signal. But he's not even raising his hand so anyone can see this. His hand is dangling out of the side of the truck. I mean, this is crazy beyond words. And a person who is a minority, an African American, saw this, took a photo, put it online, and you know what happened? Cafferty, who is Mexican American, who said he wasn't trying to do this, had no idea that he said he was just trying to crack his knuckles and rest his hand on the side of his truck at a red light with no one watching him. I mean, this is like getting fired for picking your nose or like sneezing or something. This is crazy. That's right. They fired him. They fired this guy. He wants his job back. He should sue the crap out of them. The man who originally posted the picture, NBC News in San Diego, spoke to him, but they don't want to give his name. No. You know why? He says that he has since deleted his Twitter account and says that he might have been a little spun up over this, as in, I basically made this up because I'm an oversensitive crybaby, and says he never intended for Cafferty to lose his job, and he may have misinterpreted what Cafferty was doing. Oh, but systemic racism is everywhere. Oh, my gosh. We all have to be in fear. Oh, no, we have to be in fear of the people claiming that they see systemic racism everywhere, because they can get you fired for doing nothing. Nothing. Please, someone listening to this in the San Diego area, reach out to Emmanuel Cafferty, get him his job back, help this guy out.